Hello again, everybody, and welcome to a series that I continually have issues trying to turn it into a series. Um, I'm gonna be talking about more D&D again because you guys seem to be really, really interested in it and have given me a lot of different ideas as stuff you'd like to hear about 5th edition and previous editions and things like that. And just to give you a little bit of background as to how I create a series on here, like Stopping the Stigma or and now I'm starting to draw a blank, Lore Explorer or critting your role, all those things. It kind of starts off the idea of this uniform kind of idea, uniform format where I can follow something, and then anytime somebody tunes into that particular series, they can, kind of know before the video starts what they're in for. They won't know the information contained within the video, but they'll know the basic premise. Like with this one's for you. Every single one of them, I open it the same way. I talk about the song that I'm going to be dedicating. I talk about the person that I'm dedicating it to. I use that convoluted logic to dedicate it to someone, and then I sing the song and then do a little outro. It's the same thing over and over and over again, and that's, to me, what makes it a series. The weird thing about what I've been doing recently is I can't find a way to really standardize it because each one is going to be a little bit different. A lot of it is just me, kind of stream of consciousness trying to explain something that I've known for a relatively long time, right? Every so often I'll have to reference books and things like that, but for the most part, it's hard to describe. So, yeah, I guess the best thing I could call this is, audience introduced topics, I guess would be the best thing. And today's topic is going to be about 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons versus 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of what to expect if you go from 3rd edition into 5th edition, which is actually a relatively common thing. When to give you a little bit of history on D&D in general, when when 2nd edition came out, the differences between 1st and 2nd edition were relatively big, but for the most part, there wasn't they changed things, but there wasn't a huge left turn. Like the changes that they made were meant to make the game more streamlined, easier to play, and to let people do things that they couldn't do in the previous edition. So for the most part, people that played 1st edition, when 2nd edition came out, they didn't have a huge issue shifting over to the new system. For the most part, it was pretty well received. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that 2nd edition, kind of like 5th edition, was born from the idea of, okay, we've had Dungeons and Dragons around for 10, 15 years at this point. We've gotten a lot of feedback. It's grown exponentially. We keep having to send out new, changes and errata and all this stuff. Let's start from scratch and do this again. And so people were fine with that for the most part. There are still people that claim that D&D Basic is the best edition. They never played anything else other than that, or D&D First Edition the best. Everybody has, their own edition wars thing that they do. But the switch between 2nd and 3rd edition was a really big shift. There was a lot of things that had been true since the beginning of D&D that were no longer true. They added in feats, which was a brand new system that added a lot of complexity to the game itself. The skill system became massively more complicated. To the point where you actually would get a certain number of skill points and you'd have to spend them every time you leveled up in order to be able to do everything from recognizing a spell when it was cast to, talking to someone and persuading them to your ideas to using a wand or something like that. There was a use magic object skill. So there was quite a bit of pushback from second edition, which D&D has never been a remarkably simple game. Like it's not a Monopoly or something like that you can pick up in 10 minutes and be perfectly fine. It's always been a relatively complex game because of the complex ideas behind it. But the changes from second edition to third edition were massive, and they added significant amounts of complexity. They added all of these things, and so at that point, there were some people that adopted third edition and spent hours upon hours upon hours learning how to play this brand new system. It was almost a brand new game. And then there were people that stayed with second edition and continued to play second edition to this day. There are still second edition and first edition and basic edition D&D games. And that's something that you saw from second edition all the way up through up to fifth edition. Is you would see when the new edition would come out, you would have these people that would go, no, I'm not learning the new edition, I'm sticking with mine, and this is my edition. And that's where edition wars and stuff like that came from. So one of the things that happened with fifth edition was because the emphasis was on D&D as a whole, not just, okay, this is what fourth edition did good and this is what it did bad, and just kind of evolving like every other one. Fifth edition was designed with the idea of what is D&D. They kind of went back to their roots. They went back to the very beginning of D&D Basic and all the way through first, second, third, and fourth edition and went, okay, what is D&D? What were the things that people really liked? Like, why are people still playing second edition when third and fourth edition are out there? Why are people still playing third edition? Why are people playing fourth edition? Why are people playing D&D Basic? And so was kind of the brainchild of what turned into fifth edition. It started off as a 2-year-long, I think, roughly, playtest, where they kept releasing more rules materials and you had to sign an NDA and all this stuff, and you would get the materials and you'd be allowed to play test this brand new system and getting constant feedback, which is something they hadn't done before. I mean, they'd done play testing and things like that for their other editions, but they'd never had something this massive where the people that were going to be buying the books and everything were the ones that were giving the feedback. And I think that's one of the reasons why fifth edition turned out the way it did. So the combination of the audience giving significant amounts of feedback and the fact that fifth edition was designed to be all the best parts of D&D without the stuff that people didn't like, meant that a lot of people that had stopped playing during a previous edition or were still playing that old edition were migrating over to fifth edition and were loving it. But it did come with some issues because, again, every one of these editions has different things that they do. And the ones that are the most similar, first and second edition, still have pretty big changes that happened in them. So migrating from one edition to another can be very confusing and can be frustrating for some people because things that you had to do in other editions you don't have to do in fifth edition, and some things that you didn't have to do in other editions you do in fifth edition. So this particular video is going to be on transitioning from third edition to fifth edition, the things that you can kind of expect being familiar with third edition, and some of the things that you will not be seeing in fifth edition. So the basics of third edition. Third edition is by far the most complex and rules-heavy version of Dungeons and Dragons that has ever been, and it's one of the most complex and rules-heavy RPGs that have ever been on the market. There are a few other ones that get really, really rules-heavy. I think I mentioned GURPS in the kind of introduction to role-playing games in general video I made, and GURPS is very rule-heavy. In general, the more generic RPGs in general will tend to be relatively rules heavy because they have to be able to be adapted for a lot of different situations. But third edition literally had a rule for just about everything. And by the time 3.5, which was the big update that they did a couple years after third edition came out, that fixed a couple bugs with this system itself and added a whole lot more complexity. Once you got into 3.5, literally there was a rule for everything. There were source book after source book after source book after source book. The Dungeon Master's Guide was just full of tables and explanations and all this stuff, and it was just mind-numbingly complex. That was so if you are a third edition player and you're used to that, okay, well, to give you an example, something as simple as a ranger making a longbow attack against an enemy that is fighting one of their allies. Like I've said in previous videos, most rolls or most actions in D&D are resolved by rolling a d20. So that's what you're going to start with, is you're going to roll a d20. Then you would know, depending on your level and what classes you've taken and things like that, you would know in third edition what your basic attack bonus was. Certain classes would just get a boost to any attack that they make. They called it their basic attack bonus. Then you would look at the weapon that you were using, because your weapons had attack bonuses as well, and they would fluctuate based on the weapon, how much damage it did, how unwieldy it was, things like that. So for a longbow, if I remember correctly, I might be misremembering this because it's been a long time since I've played third edition anything. I believe the attack bonus for a longbow was +3. It's either +2 or +3. So you have your basic attack bonus, you add that to the weapon attack bonus, and then you will also add your attribute attack bonus, which for a bow is your dexterity bonus. Now, those three numbers are what are called static numbers. They don't technically change until you level up and your basic attack bonus gets higher or your dexterity score gets higher, something like that. Those are static. So theoretically, when you roll that d20, you might already know that you have a +7 to your attack roll. Pretty simple, pretty easy. That's where it ends. Then you have to start dealing with what are called floating modifiers. Things like, is the opponent flat-footed or not? Flat-footed meant that they hadn't acted in combat yet, and therefore they would react differently. If they were in melee with another opponent, that made it more difficult for you to hit them at range, so that would be a negative floating attack bonus. Then you had to consider the feats that you had. If you had weapon focus or weapon expertise, I think was the next level up, that would add more to your bonus. And then there was other environmental factors like, whether or not you had clear line of sight, whether or not they had any sort of cover due to a person being in your way, one of their other allies being in your way, one of your allies being in your way. There were all these floating modifiers to the point where a single round, a single turn could take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to an hour, as you sat there and you went, well, this rule book said this way, and this says this, and this. And so it was, again, it was complicated. It was very, very complicated. 5th edition reduced that significantly. I mentioned before, the big thing with 5th edition was the advantage, disadvantage. All the floating modifiers and things like that, except for cover, all the floating modifiers went away and were replaced with advantage, disadvantage. So firing into melee doesn't do anything. Flat-footed doesn't exist. Being prone technically imposes disadvantage in 5th edition, whereas it would be a floating modifier in 3rd edition. So math-wise, if you're going from 3rd edition to 5th edition, the first thing you're going to notice is there is a lot less math to do. Generally, you're going to have a static number, and that's it. And it's going to, your attack roll is going to be an attribute score, or an attribute modifier, ability score modifier, plus your proficiency bonus, which proficiency bonus replaced everything from basic attack bonus, training, all these other things that would give you these strange bonuses. It was all replaced by this one static thing, proficiency bonus, that gets higher as you get higher. So again, doing things like making attacks and stuff like that significantly more simple in 5th edition than they were 3rd edition. The other thing that 3rd edition introduced was this system called feats. Feats have been present since 3rd edition. I think there might have been something similar to it. In 2nd edition, they had proficiencies, and the more proficient you were with certain weapons and certain things, the better you were at using them, the higher your attack bonus was, things like that. With 5th edition, sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. So 3rd edition added these things called feats, and they continued into 4th edition, and they do exist in 5th edition, but they are very, very different. In 3rd edition, every character got a feat roughly every 2 levels. And there were certain classes, specifically the fighter, and I think paladins as well. There's a couple classes that would get extra feats. Fighters specifically would get feats like almost every level. And what these feats were is they would change how the character plays. Weapon finesse was a feat. And generally at first level you would take a feat. Some humans could take an extra feat. That was one of their racial abilities. Some classes would give you extra feats as well, but so you had they would change the way that your character plays, but they were small incremental things. 3rd edition was designed to be played between levels 1 and 20, and like I said, roughly every other level, sometimes every level, depending on your class, you would get a feat, and they would be, small changes to how the character plays. Weapon finesse meant that for certain weapons, you could use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier for the attack roll. Now, weapon finesse only applied to attack rolls, not damage rolls. So if you were building like a rogue, and you wanted him to be kind of a stabby rogue that used a lot of dexterity, because you use dexterity for stealth checks and disarming traps and stuff like that, what you would do is you would get weapon finesse so that they could hit more accurately. And rogues in general, most of their damage was done through sneak attack. So it wouldn't matter if you had a low strength score, because for damage rolls you would add your strength modifier to the damage rolls, even if you were using weapon finesse. So it meant that no matter what character class you were playing, if you wanted to do damage with a melee weapon, you had to have something in your strength score. So it made it so you were required to have more and more skills in order to have a useful, or a more and more high ability scores and modifiers in order to be able to be a decent character that could do damage, that could, exist in the world. Other feats that you would see was like improved unarmed strike. Some classes would get feats for free. Like rangers at level 2 would get dual wielding for free. Dual wielding was another thing that reduced floating modifiers. If you were attacking with 2 weapons, you would have a to-hit penalty. I believe it was -3 on your main hand and -6 on your offhand. But if you had dual wielding, it reduced it to I think it was 2 on your main hand and -4 on your offhand. If you had improved dual wielding, it would make it 0 on your main hand and -2 on your offhand or something like that. So again, floating modifiers. These were all feats that you had to take in order to dual wield. And then you could also get defensive, dual defensive or something like that, where basically it meant that while you were wielding two weapons, your AC was higher. And then there were other feats like you could get feats that focused on certain schools of magic, so that it would be more difficult for monsters to save against your spells. There were feats that made it easier for you to get through. They had a spell penetration feat that would make it easier for your spells to get past your opponent's defenses, and like just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feats. And the feats were meant to be ways that you could really customize your character so you could play the exact character that you wanted. What they turned into was complexity for complexity's sake. For example, if I wanted to play, a dual wielding fighter, not an uncommon thing to want to do, in order to actually be able to hit with both weapons on a fairly regular basis, not only would I need to make sure that I had light weapons in both hands, I would also need to have both the dual wielding and improved dual wielding, along with ambidexterity feats. So that's 3 feats, which means you're at least level 5 or 6 in order to get those. I would also need, probably because in order to get these feats, like improved dual wielding required a dexterity of 15. So more likely than not, in order to get my dexterity high enough to be able to do these dual wielding and things like that, I would need to have a decent dexterity, which means I probably would not be able to have both a really good dexterity and a really good strength. So I'd probably have to take weapon finesse as well, which is another level or 2. So that means in order for you to be... There's that bug here. Go away, bug. Go away, bug. Go away, bug. Where'd you go, bug? If you went in my drink, I'm going to be... Yeah, you went in my drink. Of course you did. Now I can't drink it, you stupid bug. That was fun. I love bugs. And I just ruined everything here. Alright, so anyways... So that was 3rd edition, and that's what feats were in 3rd edition. 5th edition has feats. They are not 3rd edition feats. Feats in 5th edition you get once roughly every 4 levels. And you have a choice when you can take a feat. You can either take a feat, or you can improve one of your ability scores by 2 points, or 2 of your ability scores by 1 point. What that means is that feats, there are nowhere near as many feats in 5th edition as there are in 3rd edition. And every feat makes massive changes to how you play your character. For example, I mentioned that dual wielding fighter. In order to do that in 5th edition, first of all, there's no to-hit penalties for dual wielding. You just have to have a light melee weapon in both hands. And then for your bonus action, you can make an extra attack with your offhand weapon. So it's really, really simple to do. It means that you can dual wield and hit right at level 1 without having to invest in a bunch of feats and stuff like that. However, there are a couple things that will affect how well you dual wield. There are certain classes that get these things called fighting styles. Fighters get access to all of them. Paladins get access to a few of them. I think Rangers get access to a few of them. And what these fighting styles do is they change how certain things work. One of the fighting styles you can get, which you'll generally get at level 2-ish for most classes, is the dual wielding fighting style. Generally, if you're using 2 weapons, what happens is, in order to keep the game balanced as much as possible, with your first attack, when you hit, you'll do damage, the damage die of the weapon, plus you'll add your ability score modifier to the damage as well. So if it's a if it's a finesse weapon, like I mentioned before, you can use your dex modifier for the attack rolls and the damage rolls. If you're dual wielding, when you hit with that offhand attack, you don't add your modifier to the damage. So the offhand attack would just do. I don't know why I'm using my right hand for my offhand. It's not. I'm right-handed. But anyway, it shows up on the left side of the screen. But anyway, so the offhand attacks would hit for less damage for most people. If you take the dual two-weapon fighting style, then you can actually add the ability score modifier to the damage of your offhand weapon. So it basically means you're doing more damage with it. It doesn't make it easier to hit or anything like that, like the previous edition, like 3rd edition would do. It just means you can do more damage with it. You're better at using two weapons. So that's one thing that can change it. There is also a dual wielder feat. And this really shows the difference between feats in 3rd edition and feats in 5th edition. 3rd edition, a feat might be, okay, we're going to, dual wielding again. It did a -2/-2 to the penalty for using two weapons. So that was pretty simple, and all it did was change 2 numbers. That was all it did. It was very, very simple. Dual wielder does a lot more. Dual wielder lets you draw or stow 2 weapons instead of 1 as part of the attack action. Generally, without dual wielder, as part of your attack action, you can draw a single weapon. So if it's the first round of combat and the bad guys are coming at you, you don't have to waste your turn just taking your sword out. That's part of your attack action, is just drawing your sword and attacking with it. With dual wielder, you can pull 2 weapons out instead of just 1. In addition to that, you also are now no longer limited to only using light weapons when you dual wield. They can't be two-handed weapons, but instead of using like scimitars, which are light weapons, you can move up to long swords, which are not light weapons, and they do a d8 of damage instead of a d6. Or you can use battle axes, not like great axes, but battle axes, 2 battle axes instead of 2 hand axes, which are smaller and do less damage. So it lets you wield bigger weapons where you couldn't before. And then the other thing is, whenever you have 2 weapons out, your AC is increased by 1. So with that kind of puts a lot of things all together. It kind of added the dual wielding and improved dual wielding and ambidexterity all into one feat, because all it did is it made it so you could technically, with ambidexterity and those other things, you could dual wield longswords and wouldn't have to worry about the fact that you had these massive disadvantages, because the feats would cancel those out. So those are all wrapped up into it. Defensive two-weapon defense, I think is what it was called, was rolled into there to give you the additional +1. And then something that didn't even exist in 3rd edition, just drawing 2 weapons at the same time. I believe there was a rule for it. I don't remember there being a feat that allowed you to do that, though, was put in there as well. So that really kind of describes the big difference between feats in 5th edition and feats in 3rd edition, which is going to be one of the big changes that you're going to notice if you're going from 3rd edition to 5th edition. Feats change things massively. They are large changes. Again, they only happen once every 4 levels. They make a major impact on how you play your character. There are feats that do everything from give you the ability to, give your friends a rousing speech and give them temporary hit points. There are feats that, again, let you dual wield. There's feats that let you use crossbows more effectively. Feats that the crossbow expert feat lets you fire multiple times around with a crossbow. Without that, you can only, doesn't matter how many attacks you have, you can only fire a crossbow once per round without that. And it also removes the disadvantage you get for making a ranged attack when someone is in within 5 feet of you. So the weird thing about that feat is if you you can take crossbow expert, and I see a lot of warlocks do this. They will take the crossbow expertise feat and never use a crossbow because of that little caveat of you no longer face any sort of disadvantage using ranged attacks in melee. That's a big deal. That's a huge game changer. So that's what feats are in 5th edition. They change how your character plays by a pretty massive amount. There are even feats that work almost like a pseudo multiclass. There's a feat called Magic Initiate, which basically gives you a cantrip and 2 spells from any magic casting class that you want. You don't have to meet minimum requirements or anything like that. You just get this cantrip and this spell for a feat. And it's, again, it's another way that you can really customize your character. If you wanted to have that fighter that just had that tiny little twinge of magic user in them, or you just wanted one cantrip or one spell, that was really it, Magic Initiate is the feat for you. And again, that would mean you wouldn't have to waste a level going into Wizard or Sorcerer or something like that just to get a single cantrip that would fit your character really well. So, yeah, that's going to be one of the big differences you're going to notice. The other big difference is 3rd edition. Again, you went from levels 1 to 20. After about anywhere from level 9 to about level 12, you really stopped getting benefits from being in a single class. There were some higher level benefits, but for the most part in 3rd edition, you had to multi-class. Now, multi-classing in 3rd edition and 5th edition work very, very much the same way. When you level up, you can choose a class to level up to gain a new level in. It can be the class that you already have, or it can be any other class that you meet the prereqs for multi-classing. Like wizards, you have to have a minimum intelligence of 13. That's very similar to 3rd edition, although the rules are significantly more simple in 5th edition for multi-classing than they are. The requirements, I mean, are generally easier in 5th edition than they were in 3rd edition. 3rd edition, you would have, sometimes 2 or 3 different stats that you had to have certain ranks in order to be able to do it. The other thing that 3rd edition had, because you basically had to multi-class in 3rd edition by the time you started getting to higher epic tier kind of play, they had what were called prestige classes. Prestige classes were classes that you could multi-class into but had really, really stringent requirements. Like the Blade Singer is one of my favorite classes. I think it's really, really cool. In order to be a Blade Singer, you had to be at least, I think, level 5 or 6. You had to be able to cast, I believe it was level 3 spells. You had to have a basic attack bonus of at least, I think at least 2. You had to be an elf or a half elf. And it was pretty stringent to be able to play as a blade singer, which actually makes sense when you look at the lore and everything of the Blade Singers of why I did that. But again, it was really, really complicated. In 5th edition, Blade Singer is a school for wizards. You choose it at 3rd level. It's part of the Sword Coast Adventures guide, so it's not in the base book. It's in one of the supplementary materials. And yeah, as long as you're a wizard and you're an elf, you can become a Blade Singer. That's it. It doesn't require, making sure you take... that was the other thing with 3rd edition, is you had to take certain feats in order to be able to get into these prestige classes. So generally, you weren't getting into prestige classes until, even if the minimum level was 5, which I don't think it was, but even if the minimum level was 5, you normally couldn't prestige class until about 7 or 8. because you had all these different feats that you had to get, and you had to make sure you had the right ability scores and all that. Like, you had to plan your character from level 1 all the way through most of your character at level 1, because you had to make sure you were hitting the right things. That doesn't really happen in 5th edition. First of all, going from 1 to 20 in a single class has major benefits. As classes get higher, they get really, really cool, powerful abilities. Things like the 18th level abilities for most classes sound broken when you look at them. Things like the 18th level monk ability, they get improved invisibility and resistance to all damage while they're invisible, just by burning 4 key points, which at that point they have 18 key points and only need a short rest to get them back. So yeah, every round or every combat, they are probably turning themselves invisible and then going to town on all the bad guys because they take less damage. They get advantage on all their rolls because nobody can see them, and they get to do cool stuff. That's an 18th level ability. In 3rd edition, you really didn't have high level single class abilities. You were expected to multi-class in one form or another. So that's the other thing that you're going to notice going from 3rd edition to 5th edition is you can be a pure wizard all the way to level 20. You can be a pure fighter all the way to level 20, or a pure rogue all the way to level 20. And there are advantages to doing that. However, there are also advantages to multi-classing. And there are some pretty interesting combinations. If you guys are interested in it, again, leave a comment below if you guys are. I could probably do an entire video on kind of not really broken, but really, really good synergizing abilities from different classes that don't take a huge investment to get. Things like in the Adventure League, you see this a lot, where you will get people that are playing Shadow Monks that will take 2 levels of Warlock. And the reason that they take 2 levels of Warlock is because Warlocks, one of their Eldritch invocations in 5th edition, is they can get the ability to see through magical darkness. One of the interesting things about the darkness spell in 5th edition is if you have dark vision, it doesn't work in the darkness spell. You have to specifically have an ability, which very, very few monsters do, and only, I think, 1 or 2 different characters, player character classes actually have the ability to do, which is to see in magical darkness or have some other way to see. Like if you have Trevor Sense or True Sight or something like that, that will let you see that. Normally you can't. So what you see is the Shadow Monks at level 3 get the ability to cast Darkness. The way Darkness works is you cast it on an item or an object. And what it does is it sticks to that object. So if they cast darkness on like a pebble on the ground, if they were to pick up that pebble, as long as it's not completely covered, like if you put it into a box or something, the darkness would only be in the box and it wouldn't go outside the box. As long as there's a crack or something, the darkness wraps around corners and stuff like that. So what Shadow Monks would do is they would take 2 levels of Warlock, and then they would use their key points to cast Darkness, pick up the rock that they cast the Darkness on, and they basically had this moving 20-foot radius sphere of darkness that stopped line of sight on them, that made them basically invisible to their enemies while they could see in it. So, yeah, it's a really good synergy of 2 different classes that created this really useful thing. It basically meant, long range archers, spellcasters, things like that. In order to hit you with anything requiring an attack roll, they have to be able to see you, and darkness prevents that. So it breaks line of sight. For melee fighters, they can actually take a swing at you if they can't see you, but they do it with disadvantage. And if they can't see you and you attack them, you do it with advantage. So you now have these monks running around almost immune from ranged attacks because no one can get line of sight on them. The only thing the bad guys can do is cast something like fireball or something into the area and hope that they hit them. And they would just like run around the battlefield beating the crap out of people, always having advantage and stuff like that. It was a really, really cool idea. So again, there are benefits to multiclassing, but you're going to lose some things as well. The more different classes that you get into, the more you can synergize different abilities and things like that, but the less really powerful high-level abilities you're going to get. Once you get above level 10, you start getting really, really powerful, incredibly useful abilities. Things like with monks, they get proficiency in all saving throws. That's super huge. That makes them very, very difficult to hurt. They can re-roll their saving throws. Again, if you hardcore need to make sure that you don't fail a saving throw, monks are going to have a much better chance than any other class, and they don't get that ability till I think like 14 or 15. So again, by multi-classing in 3rd edition, necessary. You basically had to do it eventually. In 5th edition, not necessary at all. I have not played a multi-classed character yet, and there's a trade-off, which is true about everything in 5th edition. There's always going to be a trade-off. Do I want to do this or do I want to do that? It gives the player a lot of choice. It gives the player the ability to really make meaningful decisions, whereas in 3rd edition, a lot of your choices were made for you, because if you didn't make certain choices, if you didn't do certain things, like if you didn't multi-class, you were going to be vastly underpowered compared to your multi-classed friends and allies. So that's the other kind of really big difference going from 3rd edition to 5th edition, is going to be multi-classing is easier to do, but there are major trade-offs that have to happen. There are some people that will still claim that multi-class characters are always more powerful than single-class characters. I will argue until I'm blue in the face with that, because again, I play single-class characters with multi-class characters all the time, and because I know how to play my characters well, I get to have a lot of fun. As they're sitting there going, well, I'm doing this and this and this and this and this, I'll go, okay, I do this, this, and this. Like, really? Yeah. How did you do that? Because I am a high-level single-class character. I get to do cool stuff. They reward you for being a single-class character, whereas in 3rd edition, they really discouraged it. So, yeah, that's, the big differences between 3rd edition and 5th edition. 3rd edition, very rules-heavy. There's a rule for everything. 3rd edition feats were very small changes that happened all the time, where in 5th edition, they are very large changes that happen very rarely. And multi-classing is different. There are no prestige classes in 5th edition. They did try some playtest material to put in a prestige class, and it did not go over well whatsoever. 5th edition is just not built for prestige classes. So there are no prestige classes, which were a staple of 3rd edition. And multi-classing in general is much more simple to do. You just have to have a single ability score that fits the class you're multi-classing into. But it comes with drawbacks. You're not going to be as powerful as your single-classed. You're not going to have the same raw power as a singular class at the same character level. However, if you synergize well and you really like the idea of min-maxing and really kind of getting the most out of the system itself, multi-classing can make some really broken characters, and can also make some really interesting characters and things like that. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. So yes, anyone that is switching over from 3rd edition to 5th edition, you will the things that you will like is the fact that you can multi-class into any character, just like 3rd edition. You still have the ability to create very, very customizable characters and play the exact kind of character that you want. To give an example, one of the characters that I play in the Adventure League is a hunter. He is a dual, or not a hunter. Well, he is a hunter, but he's a ranger. He's the hunter archetype. He's a dual whip wielding ranger that is basically an homage to Castlevania, and his name is Adrian Belmont. And he is one of my favorite characters to play because he started off as just I made him so that he could basically be a Castlevania Belmont character. So he used a whip. He has holy water. He has throwing daggers. He has throwing axes. Things like that. Like I built him, and I didn't have to do too much to be able to do that. I had to take dual wielding because whips are not considered light weapons. So in order to wield two of them, I had to take dual wielding. And that was really it. Like everything else, I've just done ability score improvements as I've gotten him higher and higher. And he's a ton of fun to play. He gets to run around, whipping people. His background was he was a folk hero. He killed a vampire, which there's a huge long story about everything and the fact that he actually has severe psychological problems, which is why he acts the way that he does. But because he's the folk hero, he thinks that he's famous. And so I'm not kidding. This was an interaction we had during the Ravenloft campaign, which is what I built this character for. During the Ravenloft season for the D&D Adventure League, one of the adventures is the head of this town called the Burgermeister brought you and your party in and basically said, hey, listen, I don't have enough money to pay Strahd's tax on us. So, and the way the adventure was supposed to go is he would go, hey, I don't have enough money to pay the tax. If I don't pay the tax, Strahd's going to take it off by killing the people of this town. You don't want that. I don't want that. So I heard that there is this crypt, over here that has all this treasure in it. So if you guys go get that, I'll let you keep some of the treasure, and then we can use the rest of the treasure to pay off the back taxes and everything like that. That's what's supposed to happen during this meeting. So what happens is the meeting starts, and we have a really awesome dungeon master. Like, he's doing voices and everything. He goes, so there is problem with taxes. Strahd will be sending his lieutenants to come, and they will come to collect the taxes. I do not have the taxes. It has not been very good for the city most recently, so I am in need of money. And before he can get to the pitch of there's this thing you can go do to make money, my character goes, okay. I get it. You don't have to go any further. Let's not beat around the bush. First of all, yes, I am Adrian Belmont. And the rest of the party, I had warned them. I'm like, by the way, guys, my character is really weird. And he thinks very highly of himself. So just FYI. But I didn't give him too much information. So in the middle of this meeting, I go, yes, I am Adrian Belmont, and I can see what you're saying. All right? And don't worry. You don't even have to ask. I'm a nice enough guy. I want you guys, don't think of me as a celebrity, all right? Don't think of me as this, amazing person that you guys all admire and adore. I want you guys to think of me just as another adventurer. All of us, we are adventuring together. We are all in the same group, in the same party. So I don't want you guys to think about just the kind of amazingness that is me. Just consider me one of the other guys. However, saying that and seeing that you guys do have some money problems here, I know what you're going to ask, and to be blunt, I'm totally on board with this. I'll have to talk to my manager, but I'm saying all of this in character while the entire table is just looking at me like I'm nuts. So I go, yeah, I'm going to have to talk to my manager, but you know what? I'm actually willing to just completely forego my normal rider, and I'll basically donate the appearance fee that you would normally give me I'll donate it to the cause. I'll do this for free. We can call it charity work. You can invite people from the other nearby towns and everything. And I'll do an event. I'll do a Q&A session. I'll do some signings. We'll be able to sell some merch and stuff like that. And that way we can use all the proceeds from that to pay off your back taxes. And it'll be great. So, you don't even need to thank me for this. I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. And the dungeon master's just sitting there looking at me completely dumbfounded. Because he's like, so is there another idea from one of you? Because there's a crypt with gold in it. And you could go get the gold for the taxes. And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess that could work. I think your first idea was probably going to be a little bit easier. And to be honest, I think it would help the town as a whole. Because, appearances and Q&As and, stuff like that, they bring in business to the town. It's not just going to be my merch that's going to be selling well. The restaurants around town are going to do better, and there's going to the tavern in town and the inn in town are going to be packed, so that because people are going to travel here, they're going to need somewhere to sleep. All the different places, all the different retail outlets, they're all going to be able to sell all this extra stuff. It's all this extra foot traffic that comes in. So I really think the adventure-y type thing would be to go into this crypt. But I think, benefit concert kind of thing, appearance, signings, Q&A session. I think what you're describing now is a Band-Aid. It's going to fix the problem right now. What I'm suggesting has a possibility of creating, a tourism industry for this town. And I really think long-term, that's going to help keep the town operating much better than just going off and stealing some dead chick's gold. And at this point, the entire table is laughing their asses off because the dungeon master doesn't know what to do. And one of the guys I'd played with before goes, "No, Adrian, that's a great idea. However, logistically, I just think it's going to take a little bit too long to get everything set up. Like, the guys are coming really soon. I think it'll be faster for us to go get the gold. And then we can actually use some of the gold for your little Q&A, whatever in the hell you just said." I'm like, okay, no, that's cool. No, that's fine. I'll call my manager and it'll be great. I guess I can call off my publicist as well. But no, I'm fine with that too. Again, I'm an adventurer just like you guys. Don't think of me as Adrian Belmont. Just think of me as, hey, that cool guy that I'm going on an adventure with. So yeah, like this, that was the character I made. And again, the only thing I had to do to make this very bizarre character was I chose the background that fit. I gave him a low charisma score so that he never succeeded in getting people. That's kind of the running joke with him, is he always thinks he's more famous than he actually is. So he just over and over and over again will go, "Yes, I'm Adrian Belmont," and he'll try and convince people that he's famous. No one ever believes him. He has a negative charisma modifier. No one ever believes him. It's just fun to play. And again, he's a really complex character. He can do really cool things. And the only thing I had to do was take a single feat, which with him being a human, humans, just like in 3rd edition, they have a variant where you can get a feat at first level. So I took the dual wielder feat at first level, and I was set. That was all I needed to do. And everything else has just kind of gone downhill from there to this crazy character that I play. He's an absolute blast, and he drives some party members nuts because I really get into the role playing aspect of it. Because I will do stupid things because I believe I'm famous when I'm not. And stuff like that. So again, in 3rd edition, you would probably have to you'd have to burn a feat for whip proficiency. You'd have to burn a bunch of different feats for dual wielding and defensive 2-weapon defense and all these other things. In 5th edition, at level 1, I already had the character I wanted to play, and it just took me playing a human. Or if I wanted to play another race, like an elf or something like that, I would have waited until level 4 when I got my first feat. And that was it. So yes, I hope any of you guys that play third edition, I hope this helps you kind of make the decision if you want to switch over to fifth edition. Again, I highly recommend it. I'm not a huge fan of third edition. I have played it before, and Pathfinder is basically the same kind of deal. And I don't like how complex it is because most of the complexity is simply for complexity's sake. It doesn't improve the game, it just makes it more complex and makes the barrier to entry higher. That was one of the big reasons why we saw D&D go into a pretty steep decline, starting with third edition and then fourth edition kind of sealed that nosedive down. And fifth edition has brought it back because, again, all the good things, all the fun things about previous editions are still there. You know, the easy multi-classing compared to like second edition where you had to be a non-human to multi-class. You had to choose it at level 1, or if you're a human, you could do what's called dual classing. But in order to do that, you basically would start over from level 1 and you wouldn't be able to use any of the abilities from your other class until you got your new class up to the same level that your old class was. Like, so the ease of multi-classing from third edition is back in fifth edition. Feats are still there, but they make much bigger impacts. And most of the stuff that bogged the game down into third edition, floating modifiers, strange, rules for absolutely everything, really complex rules for absolutely everything, is gone. And it's replaced by static numbers and the advantage-disadvantage system, which is awesome. It is super, super useful and super, super fun. Other than that, any character you could play in third edition, you can probably translate them to fifth edition without too much difficulty at all. The systems are very, very compatible. Like even armor classes and like monsters and stuff like that from third edition don't require a massive amount of tweaking in order to make them fifth edition ready. You generally have to, you'll generally lower armor classes in general because armor classes in 5th edition normally don't get too much higher than maybe like a 20. Like a 20 is a really high armor class even for high level characters. If you start getting like 22s and 23s, like those are like ancient dragons or, demigod type characters. In general, most characters are only going to have like anywhere between like even high level characters are only going to have like an 18 to 20 AC. And hit points and hit dice and stuff like that are actually kind of similar between the two. So going from third edition to fifth edition is actually not that difficult. You just have to kind of come to terms with the fact that the massive amount of rules and complexity that you're used to are simply not going to exist. Some third edition players are going to feel like this is a much more simple version of D&D, and it's not. There's still complexity to it. You can still do a lot of really interesting things. And you can still build these very, very niche characters. They just took away all of the monotonous complexity, the complexity that was there simply for complexity's sake. A lot of people think if you add complexity to something, that automatically adds quality. It only adds quality if that complexity improves the product in some way, allows you to do something that you couldn't without that complexity. And 5th edition was really, really good at keeping enough complexity in it so you can still have meaningful choices and interesting things that you can do, but getting rid of all of the unneeded complexity. The stuff that basically was just there to make it more difficult to understand, make it more difficult to learn. The other big difference that I completely forgot about until just now, skills. In third edition, part of your leveling up process was you would invest points in skills, and you would have class skills that one skill point would turn into one skill point, and then you had non-class skills, which one skill point would turn into half a skill point when you spent them. That doesn't exist anymore. All the skills are based on your ability score modifiers. They're all linked to a certain ability score modifier, and they are either trained or untrained. Trained means you add your proficiency bonus to them. Untrained means you don't. And there are two classes, I think, that get a skill called expertise, which basically means you can add double your proficiency bonus. That is as complex as skills get. There's still a fair amount of them. There's nowhere near as many skills in 5th edition as there were in 3rd edition. There was something like 20 or 30 different skills in 3rd edition. There's not in 5th edition. I think there's, I don't know, 15 or 16. There's not a ton. And then the different defenses that you used to have a will defense and everything, it's all been changed to you have your AC and then you have saving throws. Saving throws are based on one of your attribute ability scores. So like a strength saving throw, you use your strength ability score or modifier. Wisdom saving throw, you use your wisdom modifier. And you can be trained in those as well. So if you're trained, you add your proficiency bonus. If you're untrained, you don't. So again, very simple, very easy. Does not take, again, I can knock out, I have knocked out a 5th edition character in less than 5 minutes. I don't think I've ever built a 3rd edition character in less than 30. So, yes, I hope anyone watching this that is a 3rd edition player is now considering playing 5th edition. Like I said, I think it is the best edition of Dungeons & Dragons that has ever come out. It keeps all of, or almost all of the fun aspects of every previous edition and gets rid of all the stuff that just didn't work. They were cool at the time, but it wasn't helping the game be more fun. And at the very, at the end of the day, that's what this is. It's a game and it's supposed to be fun. So anything that really took away from that fun, they took out of 5th edition for the most part. Yeah. So, yeah, that's all for me. Again, please subscribe. I'm still trying to build everything and, keep the train going. So please subscribe. Please share this with as many friends as physically possible. I still need that 1,000 subscriber thing, and I still need 4,000 hours of view time. So please keep watching the videos, keep subscribing, keep commenting. As you guys can see, for the last, I don't know, like 5 or 6 days, I have not had to come up with a theme for any of my videos. I'm simply following what you guys are asking for. So definitely, if you put something in the comments or on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you decide to contact me, I'm going to do my best to make a video about it. So anyway, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.